In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Hello, viewers. We're so glad that you've joined us this evening. So my panelists and I had recently conversed on how to be a gentle, thoughtful, conscientious mother, especially when it comes to the discipline of our children. And we unanimously agreed that this was a topic that needed much more time to cover. And so here we are to do just that. If you have not seen part one, you may want to start there or at least go find it after you hear this part two. In this last video, the one that preceded this, we talked about how a mother can determine if she needs to be more gentle with her children and some of the signs that she may be being too lenient than what is best for her child and the whole family, really. And lastly, we chatted about what a mother can do when she feels herself about to explode in anger and would really like to not go there. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to start our thoughts this evening by just pointing out that the goal for our children is to acquire all the problem-solving skills that they'll need to fully care for themselves, not just emotionally, but physically and spiritually, in complete autonomy and independence, with a dependence only on God. And because that, in a nutshell, is our primary goal, to no longer be needed by our children. Wanted, yes, but needed, not really. So, how can we empower our kids? That's really what's at the heart of everything we're going to talk about. And so, welcome, Colleen. Are you doing well?
I'm doing great.
Good. Glad to hear it. Any news?
I have had the pleasure and the privilege to be around some new mothers. And they are amazing. They're so smart, and they do research and they know all these things.
I agree.
I say this is a great time to have kids, and I just think that those women and men, the husband, the dads too, they're great people, and they really they're good thinkers, and I just have high hopes for the next generation after them.
Amen, sister. Yes, there is good reason to be optimistic about the next generation. The wisdom that these new moms have acquired by watching the previous generations before them and thinking, how can I do even better? So, Lauren, you're in this generation.
I am. I'm still raising my kids, so pay no attention to what I say on this program, because clearly I don't know if I'm doing it right or not.
All right. Well,
but I'm doing my best, and that's all any of us ever do. So,
yes, well said. And Colleen and I both think you're doing amazing, and we're so glad that I know this is maybe an assignment that you're very young for, but I think having a voice here from your generation, and I just think you bring a freshness, and kind of more of our viewers can maybe identify with you being right in the thick of it, even as we speak.
It definitely looks different from the thick of it than from the outside. I know that much.
So, Lauren, would you start us off here on, we were going to talk about some specific ways a mother can work smarter, not harder, when it comes to disciplining her children, and other aspects. So what are some of your initial thoughts here?
Well, my big initial thought, and this has been a journey for me, we'll say,
yes,
is that it is interesting to me to watch my children, and the things that drive me the craziest about my children are the things in which I recognize myself in my children.
Yes.
The things that drive me the craziest about my kids and that drive me to those fits of anger that we talked about last time are the ways in which I am reflected in my children. And so I think as we start talking about discipline and some of the uglier ways that we have to get into that with our kids sometimes. I think it's important to recognize God working in our lives and in the lives of our children. And so disciplining my children, correcting my children makes me, has the potential at least, to make me closer to the person that God wants me to be, while I also help my children become closer to the people that God wants them to be. And I think for me, having that perspective on repeat over and over throughout my day, throughout my year, puts a different spin on, rather than I have told you 47 times not to touch that thing, and you're touching the thing again, and now we got to do this again. Having that perspective of God molding my character and God molding their character through me as his tool helps bring some needed perspective to that repetition.
Yes. You're not suggesting that God's disciplining us through the process of our disciplining our children, are you?
Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
And that perspective of, I get so frustrated when my kids do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And then I stop and think, oh, I do the same thing over and over again, don't I, God? Yes. And you must get so frustrated with me doing the same thing over and over again. There is just so much perspective about our relationship with God that can come through our relationships with our kids.
There's nothing you can do to understand what God goes through then, to being a parent and loving these souls with all of your heart and wanting the best for them, and them not always cooperating. So, Colleen, what are your thoughts here on some specific ways a mother can work smarter, not harder, when it comes to disciplining her children or other aspects of parenting?
I say do a lot of things early, do the right things early, and you really won't have to as much as you would.
Yes.
So it's easy to do, and that because of that, it's easy not to do. But this is the secret: if everybody's ready, start as soon as you can.
Yes.
Even if you don't have kids yet, start now. If you start disciplining yourself and deciding with your spouse what you want, what your values are, what you're going to go for with your children, and why. Not just what, but know why. You know, if you're going to make them eat spinach salads, then do research on spinach salads and why that's important, because they're not going to like that. They're going to argue with you on that. And so be ready for that. What is a parent's most important body part? Well, I say it's the backbone. You got to be able to stand up. You can't back down, because they're trying to get your authority away from you. That's just the way they're made. That is their job, is to grow up and become mature adults. So they're going to be trying to get back as much authority as they can from you. So you have to have some backbone. That way, when emotions run high or people are watching, you will stand by your strategy that you crafted during a rational, calm time. Now, you may have to go in another room, get them away from the crowd or whatever, but don't back down, because they'll bring it up in front of people. That's one way to get to you. And here's one of the things that it's sort of sad, but it gave me a bracing reality check. I'll see if the other two of you, Cindy and Lauren, agree with me. Most kids are pretty obedient when they're little. Most are pretty careful what they say. You're a lot bigger than they are. They think you know so much more. So most are pretty good. So parents, if they're not doing the right thing, if they're not listening to other people, or they're not following what they really should be doing, they get the idea that their methods worked. And it's the sad truth is that you don't really get a serious report card on your kids until they're 13, 14, 15. Now, you see some things, you see some milestones along the way, you may see some red flags, but I think, when they're 13, 14, 15 is when they're getting big. And so they're not so little. You can't really pick them up. And they have a mind of their own. And so if you wait until then to start doing the things that you know you should have been doing with them, then it's going to be really tough. You're going to work overtime. So that's not working smart. Start when they're little.
Well, and I love your idea of even start before you have kids, like people that take parenting classes before they become parents. I really admire that. Running scenarios past your husband of like, okay, say we have this challenge. What do you think would be wise? Like, thinking of all these cases and kind of like just putting your head there I think that helps you realize the gravity of what you're about to do. And it does give you more incentive to really do your best and to really kind of forethink all that you can. I ran into a writer named Philippa Perry who suggests that parents, quote, reflect on your own childhood experiences, how they are shaping your parenting style. By understanding your past, she says, you can break negative cycles and approach parenting with greater awareness and intention. Shore up the weak parts of the ways you were parented without swinging the pendulum too far one way or the other. If you feel your parents were too strict, avoid becoming too lenient. Unquote. So, and what I found on that myself was that it was often easier for me to correct the faults of the ways that I was raised than it was to duplicate the strengths within the skill sets of my parents, which were different than my own. But I thought that was also a very foundational thing to consider. And obviously, children learn more from what parents do than what they say. So we want to embody the values and the behaviors that we're aiming to instill in our children, right? Set that great example. Now, it can't take the place of the verbal instruction and all the rest, but really modeling all those behaviors. Other bullet points that I had that I wanted to share here
Can I jump in there, Cindy?
Please do.
That was excellent. I couldn't have said that better. That's why she published the book, huh? But I think sometimes it does appear to me, I think maybe Christians feel like they can't say anything negative about the way they were raised. I don't know if that's true. I do think I kind of see that. Maybe not. But you have to be analytical, and your parents, hopefully they would say, no, it's your time to shine. You do it the way you see fit. But the thing is, the tricky part is you have to be analytical. If you say your parents were too strict, figure out what it was that made them too strict. And maybe they really weren't. Maybe you just didn't like those things. Maybe the strictness made you the great person you are today. So in other words, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Is it your perspective? Were they really too strict, or was it just your perspective because you felt that during your teen years of their higher standards or whatever? So be analytical, objective about how you were raised.
Yeah. And if it was always the same the entire time, then it's hard for you to get a perspective on like what it's like to be in a lenient household. But if they were strict at one point and then lenient in another, then that really helps you to go, I liked this one and I didn't like that, so that can help. But if they were pretty consistent in one way, that might be harder for you.
That's a good point, because there are some times where they're lenient in one way, strict in another. Yes. And so you're raising entirely different people than they raised. And so, just looking at that with much objectivity as you've described. So for me, there's 3 stages in the discipline of children. There are 3 stages. And when I say discipline, I'm not talking always about punitive. Maybe there's a better word than the discipline of children. But I guess the first one would be preventative, like all the things that we do to prevent self-destruction in our children, all setting up for them an environment of success, so to speak. And then the second category, I think, when that doesn't work. Okay, so then there's the corrective stage of the discipline of children. And there's 100 ways that you could probably correct behavior, all kinds of creative ways and to customize it, for the soul that you are shepherding. And then finally, sometimes that corrective discipline didn't work. And so then there's punitive discipline. And so Colleen, would you share on your thoughts on the preventative, what we can do in terms of preventing having to go eventually land in the punitive zone?
Well, from a spiritual standpoint, start day one reading Bible stories to them, reading the Bible to them, singing with them, teaching them to know God. And of course, your authority is what's going to help them understand God's authority. They can see your authority. And so that is preventive. And of course, you know, you and your husband being strong figures and strong leaders to those children. One thing we did was to make it, I think sometimes people think this has to be this official Bible study every day, which it can be, and that's great. But it doesn't, there are other things you can do. You can just do after supper, we're going to get our Bibles out, we're going to read, go around the room and read when they can read. But when they're little, you know, you can read too. We just go back and forth. We read. We pick where we're going to read, and we're going to just read the Bible. That's easy. Who can't do that?
Yeah. Memory verses along those lines, or conversations about maybe what they studied that week in Bible class as you're driving or you're hiking or you're doing dishes, and just, in that organic way. Lauren, what are some of the things that you have found to be effective or not as effective in terms of preventative parenting?
I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective, both because I'm still raising my kids, but also because of the work that I do. So I work with a lot of adoptive families. So we see kids from hard places, kids who, for whatever length of time, did not necessarily have the kind of safe, stable upbringing that we would hope. But I also have a social work background. Because of that. And so one of the tools that I have found that I love, and I will sing its praises to anybody who will stop long enough, because I think in addition to being psychologically sound, it's also incredibly biblically sound. And it's a tool called TBRI, which stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And so it is a child, not therapy, it's a parenting method, really. That began with children from trauma, children from hard places, but is so applicable to all children because it's based on the idea, like Colleen was saying earlier, children want to be obedient. They want to do what is right. They want to do well. And so it comes at disobedience, not from a place of you're a terrible, flawed person, which I think gets into the original sin thing a little bit too. Which I think that affects our parenting more than we realize, that concept, that false concept of original sin. TBRI comes at it from a place of children want to be obedient. And so if they're not, their behavior is communicating something. And so as mom, especially when they're teeny, my job is to figure out what that communication is. And so if my child is consistently communicating something with their behavior, then my job is to say, okay, how can we fix this situation? If I believe that you want to do well, how can I help you learn to do well? And especially as they get older, that changes a little bit because there also is the natural human tendency towards self-indulgence. But things like engaging the children in playful ways when it is time to instruct or lay some groundwork. Things like encouraging felt safety in children, making sure they know that mom and dad are a safe place for them, that they can come to mom and dad, that mom and dad are not going to be unnecessarily and overly harsh, that mom and dad have their best interests at heart, and not just telling them that, but over and over and over again, repeatedly reinforcing that with our behaviors. And that's hard. I'm a little bit removed, but I remember how bad those early days can be. I remember how tired you are. And how hard and how desperately you just want 2 seconds in a dark room by yourself, and you can't get it.
Yes.
Because these little short people depend on you for everything, and you can't get away. And it is so hard to be consistent with meeting their needs at that point. It is hard to be consistent with being present and with meeting not just physical needs, but emotional and spiritual needs as well. But the effort that we put into that, like Colleen was saying, the effort that we put into that on the front end, into teaching them, Mom and Dad love you. Mom and Dad are safe, and we're going to be here for you. Mom and Dad want what is good for you, and you can trust us to help you find that. That will pay dividends for the rest of their lives once we engage in that early on.
Yes, and secure attachment, right? What you're describing is secure attachment, and really, the day that your baby is born, you begin that building of that secure attachment. And so part of that is modeling, disciplining yourself as you provide that round the clock, consistent warmth, gentleness, affection, building of trust. All of this builds that relationship that feels like emotional safety. Like, and it's in the subconscious level within your infant, right?
Absolutely.
From the very beginning. And so that bond that it builds between parent and child can actually serve to prevent some rebellion later on, because they will want to protect the beautiful bond that you have, lest they hurt your heart. They don't, if they're really bonded with you. And so fostering this secure attachment allows children to feel, we show that by allowing children to feel understood and supported, and eventually helping them to develop healthy relationships with others in the future. It all plays into that.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious what you guys know or think about your own emotional regulation, self-regulation, in terms of like that powerful example that we set when we don't explode every time. Are we like what can you tell me about like how not to soothe in destructive ways, like raging, and instead make healthier choices? What are some healthier choices you guys do on the emotional regulation, so that you can show what it looks like to sort of have it together?
That's a hard one.
Okay.
That's a hard one. And with this question, we get back to God is working in me as much as he's working in the kids that I'm raising. Because again, when I see them emotionally dysregulated, a lot of times that comes back to, well, they're just doing what I've showed them how to do.
Yes.
They're just doing the things that I routinely do. And I think that's hard because a lot of times the emotional regulation comes in our quiet, private time.
Oh.
My kids don't necessarily see the time that I put into quiet personal study and meditation and prayer. They don't see that time that I put into taking care of myself so that I can turn around and take care of them. They might see the effects. Depends on how diligent I've been in taking care of myself. But part of it is talking through it with them, I think, when they are having a dysregulated moment. And saying, when I feel this way, sometimes what helps me is X, Y, Z. Would you like to try? And a kid's not, a 3-year-old's not going to sit and meditate, but we can do stuff with them like deep breathing and body awareness and that sort of thing that will help them re-regulate.
I like how you worded that, because you're not telling them how to you're saying this often works for me, and giving them that option. I mean, and if you think about it, to me, crying it out is self-regulation. I mean, in a way, when you know you are overdue and you got that lump in your throat and you just really need a hard cry, that is smart at the right time for the right reasons. And I'm not talking about the type that holds the whole family hostage and, you're going to punish everyone because things didn't go your way. And now everybody's going to pay for it at the restaurant and like us. But I'm just saying, there's a time to cry, like there's a time to weep. Journaling, praying, obviously, reading the Bible to find solutions, trusting God, seeking wise counsel. He's going to send, if you pray to God, he will watch for who he sends that's crossing your path that actually is giving you some practical solutions. That author, Philippa Perry, says, quote, acknowledging your own mistakes and imperfections teaches children that everyone makes errors and that it's part of the learning process. This lesson fosters resilience and self-compassion. Any thoughts on this, Colleen?
Well, I think that it depends on your background and what you've done, but get lots of experience. I've said this before, get experience at being a competitor. Because you'll be much better when you've got a child doing something. And a lot of times they're just doing it to get to you. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that, but it's true. They are. So I just, I was loath to let a child to get under my skin. And the more they ramped it up, the more I was gracious and calm. I'm not saying that I was perfect. So it wasn't, I maybe had other emotions that I had to deal with more, but I have had kids, at least in Bible class, where these are older kids, they're third graders, like one that would, if you told this child that they this or that, something they didn't like, they would just throw a tantrum. Now, where did they didn't just start doing that when they were 9, did they? They've obviously been rewarded for doing that. Obviously, somewhere at school or at home or somewhere, they've thrown a tantrum and got what they wanted. So I guess you can always tell yourself, don't throw your own tantrum, because then that's what they learn. They'll learn that. So that would be one. Here's another emotion I think that we all fight. And that is the emotion of just being blah and wanting to back down and just being tired. I am tired of this. This is a trick that I hope everybody will listen to. When I felt like backing down, when you feel like backing down, think of what this behavior will look like when they are 16 and have hormones and car keys.
Wow.
That same thing, that the sassing back, disobeying you, talking like they know more than you. Just think how that's going to look when they're 16. That always when I would do that, that always give me a shot of fortitude to hold up that high standard. That was scary.
Yes. That's a great idea, Colleen. I love that. What's it going to look like? It ain't pretty.
No.
All right. So then let's transition then and talk about verbal correction. So this was preventative. Now we're moving on to verbal. And I think it's interesting in Proverbs 29:15 that it's not just the rod that gives wisdom, but rather the rod and reproof give wisdom. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Lauren, any thoughts on correction that's working for you? Or
well, I don't know if it's working.
All right.
The name of the game for me in correction is to have that discussion, to talk through what's going on, but talk is cheap. Talk is cheap, and both of my children at various times are very quick with that. I'm sorry, Mom.
Oh.
Okay, well, that's not very useful because your behavior doesn't show that you're sorry. But for me, the name of the game is de-escalation.
Yes.
Because especially when you have kids, if I've told my kids once, I've told them a million times, they get their stubbornness from me, except I'm older than them and I've had more practice. Every time there's a stubborn war, I'm going to win. But I don't want it to get to the point where it's a war. Yes. And so... And we talked about this last time. Part of it is knowing your kids. And so one of my kids, I got to throw down with him. Okay. I got to throw down with this child regularly because that's that personality. My other child, I don't have to do that with her as much. Because she has a different personality. But being able to de-escalate and to say, is this the hill that I'm going to pick? Is this the hill that I'm going to die on? Is this the battle that I'm going to choose today? And is this worth the potential deduction from the relationship bank, to borrow language from some other places?
Yeah.
Is this worth the cost of throwing down? Or is this something that I'm choosing to escalate because I don't like it, as opposed to it truly being a discipline issue and a correction need?
Yes.
And that's a difficult line to draw when you're in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on this, Colleen?
Well, yeah, and I think you're exactly right, Lauren, is to discern. You just have to do a lot of thinking. You just can't do this on the fly and let come what may. You have to think about it and go, okay, so she would not say, she put her head down and wouldn't say hello to somebody at church that said hi to her. Okay, is that, oh, I'm an introvert, or is that backward and rude? You got to decide what that is. And I would say that that needs to be corrected. You don't put your head down and not look at people. So, but I do understand that it's maybe harder for some people to get out of their shell. Understand that. And going back to what I think Lauren said a little bit about this, and I've said a little bit about that, that with you have to be, well, Jesus told his apostles or his disciples to be shrewd as serpents, yet harmless as doves. Right. So you have to be shrewd. And I remember this this guy at church that I know him and his wife, and he said that their son was 18 or 20 years old, and when the mother would ask him what he wanted to do with his life, he would tell her he was going to go into the military. Well, that was the button. She just would go off, just fly into just get emotional and try to talk him out of it. And the dad said, "Don't you know? He's not going into the military. He's just doing that. He's just pushing your buttons."
You're right.
So you need another person to stand back and go, don't get emotional about that. That's just what they want. Whoever it is, and maybe not your child, could be somebody else. But you have to be calm and, like Lauren's saying, be shrewd about it and decide, is this a battle I want to fight, or is this something I want to let go? I think she said a lot. I don't know that I can add too much.
Yes, correcting the things that really matter. That goes a long way. Sooner than better. The sooner the better. To do so immediately, when you can't always. Sometimes you're, in a social situation, but consistently to the best, that is reasonable, to the best degree that you can. And not to get out of balance, like, you don't want your relationship to just be like one correction after another. And this is all that mom does all day long is a correction and correction. So, have lots of fun, lighthearted verbal exchanges, try to, if that's sort of the default for your relationship with your kids, is all the fun and the laughter and the making the memories and the good rapport, then when you need to make that correction, it's going to shine more than if it's like she's on me all day, every day. I wanted to throw out for parents, especially that are parenting like toddler age, maybe young school age children. Here's something that I found very helpful, and you can find it at doorposts.com. And it's called an if-then poster. This kind of goes along with Colleen's idea too of like, hey, what if we had all these conversations before we are emotionally charged in the middle of a situation? So you could probably look what they have there online at doorposts.com, and you could even make your own. You don't have to buy their posters. But what they have is this if-then chart. And so you customize it. So there's a list of things that God actually forbids, including lying and stealing and hitting and teasing and picking a fight, all that and more. And so you sit down with your family and you can decide, are you the kind of family that you and your husband decide ahead of time? Okay, how shall we reward? You could also write down a bunch of wonderful behaviors. How are we going to reward the things that I show our children that they're taking to us, that they're taking care of their souls, that they are growing in the grace and the knowledge of the Lord, and the other side of that they are headed in a bad direction. So what are going to be the consequences when they lie? What are going to be the consequences if they hit or tease, etc.? And so you decide all of that ahead of time. Some families sit down. There's an advantage also of sitting down, like with all the kids too, and filling it out together. What do you guys think would be just? What do you think? If your brother or sister teased you, what do you think would be a fair consequence for that? And so now you've got that whole poster kind of filled out, and it's on the wall. Everybody knows. And so if something happens, the conversation, it really isn't between you and them. It's like between them and the poster. Like, this is what we decided. We decided this is what would happen. So, and parents find this very preventative, that the children know what kind of risk they're taking if they engage in, various bad behavior. So
I think that isn't just for the kids. It's for the parents.
Oh, totally. Because like Lauren said, how do you keep consistent when like your hormones are up and down, your sleep levels up and down, the economy's up, like everything is up and down, and you're supposed to go straight line on consistency. And so, yes, Colleen,
the good cop, bad cop thing. There may be, one of you may be a no. You may be somebody that tends to say no to them. And the other one loves to say yes because it feels so good when they smile at you. And then you're like this all the time because it's the good cop, bad cop thing. That poster would break a lot of that, I think.
I think so too. So
let's talk about it too is making those decisions for yourself. Everybody has opinions. I say that as I'm sitting here holding forth about parenting and what other people ought to do with their kids. Yeah. Everybody has opinions in the moment. Well, you just need to XYZ with that kid. And having the emotional fortitude to do what you've decided to do, but also to say, nope, that's not what we're doing in our family. Thank you. And to shut down the judgment that you're going to get from other people in both directions.
Yes.
Because you are never the right parent for everybody, in everybody's opinion.
It's a little bit like dwell with your wife in an understanding manner, only it's dwell with your children in an understanding manner and do what's best for them. Even when, I talk to a lot of moms who are maybe in congregations where I'll say the moral standards are not what they are for their children in terms of what movies are we allowed to watch, how short is our skirt. All of this. And that can be very, very challenging, and a little bit disheartening. So we really do, when we have expectations of kids that really is in their long-term best interest, kind of like what Colleen said, what is this going to look like when they're 17? Then what kind of movies, if they get to watch this at 8, what are they allowed? What are they ready for at 17? It just, yes, if her cute little bikini on the 2-year-old, but what if we just, what's that look like later? So be conscious that the decisions that how you are raising your children and what they're allowed to do or not do. Yes, I agree with Lauren. You need to make those decisions for yourself. And it's between you and God. You are going to answer to God. So we need to be very self-conscious, but also have a little bit of sensitivity of realizing that you're also, I guess, doing those other moms a favor when you are not being, when you are willing, I guess, to confront what you should confront and, set a standard. So I agree with Lauren, and would also add that let's help each other, by just really being conscientious, so that maybe we feel good about our children hanging out with the other children in the congregation and that kind of thing, that we know that they're going to be safe, spiritually speaking. Punitive discipline, ladies, corporal punishment. I asked the ladies before we started recording, what am I going to call this? So we're talking about the preventative didn't work. Then the corrective, all the different corrective things didn't work. And so now you're in like, okay, they are in rebellion. And so my thought here, one thing would be taking away privileges directly related to the violation. That obviously makes a lot of sense. But not allowing them to manipulate you by moping and pouting, because they'll do this micro rebellion thing where it's sort of like, yeah, if I'm going down, you're going down, and it's like the whole mood of the family is going to go down. So none of that being allowed. Because grounding, there's a place for grounding, but it can feel as much like a punishment to parents as it does to children, unless you outlaw that grumbling and complaining, Check out, what is it, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I think, like what happened to Israel when there was grumbling and complaining. That could be on the if-then chart, right?
40 years in the desert.
There you go. I love it. So what are your guys' thoughts on punitive? Like, how can we do this in a way that is not an expression of our, like, I'm so mad at you, I could just, So for their best interest, any principles that you can think of, either of you on this?
Get up early and think and spend a lot of time thinking, and you will always be ahead of them. You'll always know the thing that will work. So two of my kids, they didn't want to have to pay a fine for something. Oh. They didn't want to lose any money. It really mattered. My other daughter, that wasn't so much. I mean, she didn't want to give her money away, but that didn't really bother her that much. So I had a talkback bowl and a little wooden bowl on the counter. And if I said, okay, I don't want to hear anymore, and then they said it again, and I said, okay, no, every time it would be, another $1, put it in the talkback bowl, and so, but I knew that it worked. I've heard of people, if teenagers slam the door, take it off its hinges. Their bedroom door, take it off its hinges, and put it somewhere, and then they have no door on their bedroom. It's being creative and just thinking, being ahead of them. If they do seem to be if there seems to be a building problem, and you just have to be smarter and quicker, yes, and more creative. And so it is something that they care about, because there are all kinds of punishments, and a lot of kids are like, okay, whoop-de-doo, I don't care. You don't want that. Then they think they've won.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I love that. And when you were talking about it, reminded me, I guess this might have been better on the preventative, but parents that have older teens that are under a curfew, they will put an alarm clock by the front door and they'll go to bed. And so then when the child comes in before curfew, they turn off the alarm and go to bed as well. But if the alarm goes off, mom and dad know that they didn't make it to curfew. But Colleen, I really do appreciate you're outside the box. Those are two creative ideas I would have never thought of. And so I really appreciate that. What are your thoughts on punitive discipline, Lauren Bassford?
I have been known, and forgive me if this is a little crass, but especially with toddlers, I have been known to say that sometimes their ears don't work. Oh. And so I have to talk to their backsides instead. Oh. Because for me, a big part of it is remembering that even corporal punishment, even punitive discipline is still instructive. That this is not ever, all right, finally I get to just vent my anger on you. That with every step of the process, I am still instructing my children. And what we've been talking about has had me thinking about Exodus 34, where God has had Moses destroy the stone tablets, the initial stone tablets, because of his anger at the golden calf. And then he tells Moses, come back, we'll make some more. Yeah. And Moses says, show me who you are. And God responds in word, as he always does. And he talks about how he's compassionate and gracious and slow to anger and all these feel-good, oochie-gooshy, soft, comforting words. But then at the end of his self-description, he gets to, but He will not leave the guilty unpunished.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a dear friend of mine, who is the wife of one of the elders at a place where we worked and worshiped, told me, and the way she phrased it, and I love her for it, was that sometimes you got to let the crazy out.
Oh.
Because I said, how do you raise children who are good, godly children without crushing their spirits? Because that's my concern as a strong woman, as a strong person. How do I not crush their spirit? And she said, you be fun, you be gentle, you be loving, but sometimes you got to let the crazy out. Because you got to remind them that mama has some crazy in her, that mama will not leave sin unpunished.
Yes.
And mama will step in and say, nope, no, you have crossed the line. I like with the talkback bowl. You have spent all morning with a bad attitude and a bad mouth, and I'm done. And I'm not taking it anymore. And that attitude of, yes, with that attitude of, you have crossed a line. And you are going to learn that there are consequences to crossing the line.
Yes.
And I think that's very godly when we do that. I think we are copying the example of our Father when we do that.
Yes, I agree. Yes. And spankings, hopefully, in your household are a special occasion if you're raising toddlers. Like if they're, if they've defiantly crossed a clear boundary, that hopefully, and I find that usually the spanking zone lasts for maybe 2 or 3 years. I mean, it doesn't, if you've done it very thoughtfully and conscientiously and consistently, you're pretty much done before they're even school age, for the most part. Sometimes they're begging for it, then give them what they're asking for. If they're really not giving you any other choice, then that's what we're to do. We talked about, I think it was Proverbs 29:15, if I'm not mistaken. This is of God. God created us. God knows what works. But also, as we're in the course of doing that, I would remind our viewers to keep in mind that punitive discipline must always be rooted in love and respect. And if used too much, even spanking, though it's a biblical approach, loses its effectiveness. So the spanking hopefully will only last a few years, but however long it takes, and much of what follows, really, I think after that is allowing children to make choices that will not hurt them too much so that they can learn from their experiences and their mistakes, including their regrets. That takes a lot of I guess, perception. It gives a lot. You have to really be careful on, okay, are these consequences worth, I can see if they're going to be freezing cold at recess, freezing cold, but I've told them 5 days in a row, don't forget your coat. I don't know. As sometimes, and so you have to be, the consequences for teenage rebellion, can be, they can end up having a child out of wedlock. So, I mean, it gets more and more costly. And so we really want to be mindful of not robbing them from learning things the hard way by bailing them out all the time. But at the same time, giving them that amount of freedom that as they are more and more responsible, giving more and more freedom so that they can learn, again, to self-discipline. Because the main motive we want them to be making their decisions by is not wanting to hurt God's heart, or even their parents' heart. And so that fuel can last a lifetime, is that if they're very, very attached to God. So ladies, I'm going to call that an outstanding conversation again. And I just thank you so much for doing this part 2. And as we say goodnight, I want to just mention something to all of these sweet mamas that are listening. I want to remind you to take care of yourself in this process, to take care of your spirit, your soul, take care of your heart and your mind, and take that time to feed yourself on the love and the wisdom of God every day, to renew yourself, and realize this, that God puts it on children to respond with wisdom to all those sacrifices that you are making for their betterment. Proverbs 1, 8 through 9 says, hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland on your head and pendants for your neck. See, it's on them. Exodus 20, verse 12 says, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord is giving you. And then finally, Ephesians 6, 1 through 4 says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise that it may be well with you and you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So does God, amen. Does God guarantee children are faithful to God as long as parents are vigilant and loving enough? Sorry, no, but he will reward you for pouring yourself out for their well-being, whether they embrace God's wisdom or not. And I am praying right now for you, and Colleen is praying, and Lauren is praying that you will bear much, much fruit to the glory of God. You know, parenting can be the most beautiful thing that you ever do. Can also be very, very hard. So we are on your side, and we pray all the best. And with that, we'll say good night.
Good night.